On an evening in October 2014, Hien Tran was driving home from work through Orlando, Florida, in her 2001 Honda Accord. She was 51 years old. Another car pulled out and the two collided, a survivable crash, the kind people walk away from. Her airbag deployed exactly as designed, but the Takata inflator behind it had degraded over years of Florida heat and humidity, and instead of inflating, it ruptured. It turned into a small grenade, firing metal shrapnel into the cabin. When paramedics reached her, the wounds to her neck were so severe they assumed she'd been stabbed. Police opened a homicide investigation. There was no attacker. There was only the airbag. About a week after Hien Tran died, a letter arrived at her home from Honda. It urged her to bring the car in because the airbag might explode. Her case became one of the faces of the largest automotive recall in history. Tens of millions of vehicles. A device that exists to save lives, quietly turned into a weapon. The trial. On September 17, 1999, 18-year-old Jesse Gelsinger died in a hospital at the University of Pennsylvania. He had a genetic liver disorder, but a mild form, manageable with a strict diet and a handful of pills. By every measure, he was going to live. He volunteered for an experimental gene therapy trial anyway, one aimed at helping babies born with the severe version of his disease, the ones who didn't survive infancy. The treatment was supposed to be the future of medicine. 4 days before he died, doctors injected him with a virus engineered to carry a corrected gene into his body. His immune system saw the virus and went to war. Within a day, he was jaundiced and disoriented. Then came a runaway clotting disorder, then his kidneys, his liver, his lungs, shutting down in sequence. He was the first person ever publicly identified as killed by gene therapy. He hadn't joined to save himself. He had nothing to gain. The cure meant for other people's children was the thing that killed him. The blue line. On March 19, 2011, Albert and Rita Chrétien left their home in British Columbia and started the long drive to a trade show in Las Vegas. Somewhere in the Nevada backcountry, their GPS offered a shortcut. It took them off the highway, onto gravel, then onto a rough 2-track trail rarely traveled in winter. The road kept getting worse until their van sank into the mud and stopped. They were deep in the wilderness, no signal, no way out. After 3 days of waiting, Albert took the GPS unit, a little food, and a blanket, and set off on foot to find a tiny town called Mountain City. He was never seen alive again. Rita stayed with the van and survived 48 days before a family on ATVs found her. Albert's remains were discovered more than a year later, miles up into the hills. The navigation device had never malfunctioned. It had given them a real road that simply led nowhere a person could survive. Rangers have a name for this exact death. They call it death by GPS, less lethal. On October 21, 2004, Victoria Snelgrove was celebrating in the street outside Fenway Park. She was 21, a journalism student at Emerson College. The Red Sox had just beaten the Yankees, and the crowd had spilled onto Lansdowne Street. To control it, Boston police were firing FN 303 launchers, a less lethal weapon designed to sting and disperse a crowd without killing anyone. That was the entire reason it had been chosen over a real gun. An officer fired into the crowd. The projectile missed its target and struck Snelgrove in the left eye. She was a bystander, standing about 30 feet behind the person the officer was aiming at, talking with friends. The pepper ball punched through the bone behind her eye and into her brain. She died hours later. The weapon had been issued precisely so that nights like this wouldn't end in a death. Boston police never fired an FN 303 again and destroyed every one of them 3 years later. Less lethal, it turned out, was not the same word as harmless. The machine. On March 21, 1986, Ray Cox lay face down on a table at the East Texas Cancer Center for a routine radiation treatment on a tumor in his back. The machine above him was a Therac 25, computer-controlled, precise, built with safety interlocks meant to make a dangerous overdose physically impossible. There was one problem. Hidden in its software was a flaw that, under a specific sequence of keystrokes the technician happened to type that day, silently flipped the machine to full power while the screen reported everything was normal. Cox felt it instantly. A jolt like an electric shock, a flash, a frying sound, then a second burst. He had just absorbed a dose of radiation, estimated at 100 times what was intended. When he reported it, he was told that was impossible. The machine couldn't do that. Engineers spent a day trying to reproduce the error, failed, and insisted again that it couldn't happen. Ray Cox died 5 months later from the radiation. The machine built to kill cancer in careful, measured amounts had, in a few seconds, delivered a fatal dose to the patient instead. The Guardrail. On November 1, 2016, 17-year-old Hannah Eimers was driving on Interstate 75 in Tennessee when her car drifted off the road and struck the end of a guardrail. The guardrail end terminal has one job. In a crash, it's supposed to absorb the impact, unbuckling and peeling the rail safely away from the car. This one, a model called the Lindsay X Lite, did the opposite. Instead of cushioning the hit, the rail locked up and speared straight through the driver's door and through Hannah. She was killed instantly by the device installed to protect her. And here's the detail that turns tragedy into something colder. That exact end terminal had been pulled from Tennessee's approved list just 1 week earlier, over concerns it failed at highway speeds. It was still standing on the interstate. Others had already been speared by the same design. Then, in the weeks after Hannah's death, her family received a bill, nearly $3,000, to replace the guardrail that had killed her. The thing between the road and the ditch had become a spear aimed straight down the lane. The drill. On a ship, the lifeboat is the last safety device, the thing everyone is trained to run to when all else fails. By law, crews rehearse with them, lowering and raising the boats on their cables so the equipment is ready for the day it's truly needed. The crew of the cruise ship Thomson Majesty were doing exactly that. On February 10, 2013, docked in calm water at La Palma in the Canary Islands. As a lifeboat full of crew was being lowered for the drill, one of the hoisting cables failed. The boat swung, the second cable tore loose, and the whole thing fell, roughly 65 feet, flipping upside down as it hit the water. 5 crew members were killed. 3 men from Indonesia, 1 from the Philippines, 1 from Ghana. The nearly 1,500 passengers on board were never in danger. The men who died were practicing how to save lives, in a drill, at the dock, in good weather. The boat that exists to carry everyone to safety killed the people rehearsing how to launch it, the fences. On April 15, 1989, thousands of football fans filed into Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield, England, for an FA Cup semi-final. To control crowds and stop fans from spilling onto the pitch, the standing terraces were divided into pens and fronted by tall steel fences, a safety and crowd control measure completely standard for the era. As more and more supporters were funneled into the central pens, the crowd began to compress. The people at the front were pressed against the very fences built to contain them, with no gate to escape through and an unstoppable wall of bodies behind. There was nowhere to go. 97 people were crushed or asphyxiated against those barriers. They had done nothing but go to a football match. The fences had been raised in the name of safety and order, and instead they sealed a packed terrace shut and turned it into a trap. The disaster rewrote how an entire country builds its stadiums. The fences came down, and the old standing terraces went with them. It remains the deadliest sporting disaster in British history. If you'd like to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments.